All right, let's get right into it. You've probably been there, right? You're in a deep discussion, maybe a debate, and then someone pulls out the ultimate conversation stopper. Well, that's just your truth. It's this really common but super confusing idea that truth is all relative, all subjective. But what are we really saying when we say that? Let's unpack it. This is the classic line, isn't it? This is the phrase at the very heart of the whole issue. Now, on the surface, it sounds pretty reasonable, pretty open-minded, but more often than not, it's used as a way to just shut things down, to hit a dead end instead of actually going deeper. And that's the real problem. It's a trap. Because if every single truth is just a personal feeling, well, how do we ever agree on anything? How do we solve problems together? The source material for this explainer actually calls this way of thinking unrealistic and impractical. And honestly, it's a trap we really need to figure a way out of. So how do we get out of the trap? Well, we start by questioning the assumption itself. The source suggests we can actually take this whole idea apart by asking a few simple but really powerful questions. Okay, first question. When you say something is true for you, what do you actually mean? Are we just talking about a personal preference, like chocolate is the best ice cream flavor? Or are you trying to make a bigger claim about the way things are for everybody, just from where you're standing? That difference is absolutely crucial. And this leads to something kind of weird, a real contradiction. We often say, oh, we have to consider other people's opinions, which suggests that our own view isn't set in stone yet. So then, why do we turn around and state our subjective truth like it's a confirmed fact? Which brings us to the last question in this little series. Let's say you've actually confirmed something. You've got evidence, you've got facts to back it up. Why on earth would you still call it subjective? I mean, at that point, it's moved way beyond just a personal feeling, right? You see, asking these questions starts to show us that maybe the problem isn't the idea of truth itself. Maybe the problem is that we're just really sloppy with how we use the word relative. We've started treating it like it means random or made up, and that's just a huge misunderstanding of what the word actually means. This is such a great way to see the difference. The common mistake is thinking relative means something is true for me, but just, poof, doesn't exist for you. But a much better way to think about it is that the truth exists in both of our situations. It just shows up differently. It's not gone, it's just completely dependent on the context. So here's the big takeaway. Relative truth does not mean there is no truth. It just means that truth is connected to the circumstances. Think about it this way. Is it cold outside? Well, that depends, right? The answer is relative to whether you're in sunny California or snowy Alaska. The temperature is a real fact in both places, but what we call cold is totally relative to the context. Okay, so if truth is all about context, does that mean we're just lost floating around with nothing to hold on to? No, not at all. It turns out, even in a world full of relative truths, there are some really basic principles of logic that give us some solid ground to stand on. This right here, this is the bedrock. It's a basic rule of logic called the law of non-contradiction. A light switch can't be on and off at the same time. An object can't be here and not here in the same instant. This one simple rule gives us a foundation for clear thinking. Let's just walk through this for a second. Take a statement like, it's raining. That can be true, or it can be false. Okay. It might be true where I am right now. It might be false where you are. So the truth of that statement is relative to our location, our state. But right here, right now, for me, it can't be both raining and not raining. That's certainty. And here's another great tool for thinking about all this. When things feel uncertain, we can separate possibility from probability. For instance, is it possible that it will snow tomorrow in the Sahara Desert? I mean, technically, maybe, but is it probable? Absolutely not. Focusing on what's probable helps us make smart judgments even when we don't have absolute 100% certainty. So where does that leave us? Well, we've basically taken a phrase that usually kills a conversation and turned it on its head. We've made it a starting point for thinking more deeply and more clearly about what truth even is. So let's just recap the big ideas here. Relative doesn't mean imaginary, it means it depends on the context. And understanding that context is everything. Even then, we have basic logic to keep us grounded. But maybe the most important thing is that the whole point of these conversations isn't to prove you're right and shut someone down. It's to ask better questions to figure out where we can find common ground. And this is really what I want you to take away from all this. The next time you're in one of those conversations, instead of saying, well, that's just your truth, try asking a different question. Try asking, okay, under what conditions is that true? Just that one little shift turns a dead end into an open road. And that's where real understanding begins. You've heard it a million times, right? Truth is relative. We've all said it, probably to get out of an argument. But what if we've got that phrase all wrong? Today, we're going to tear that common idea down to the studs and build a much more powerful way to think about truth. Okay, let's get right into it. When someone drops that line, truth is relative, what are they really getting at? Is it some deep philosophical insight, or is it just, a conversation ender? The answer is way more interesting than you'd think, and it kind of reveals this huge misunderstanding of what relative even means. All right, so first things first, we've got to tackle what most people hear when that phrase comes up. And, well, we can think of it as the certainty puzzle. I mean, for a lot of us, truth is relative feels like a slippery slope, doesn't it? If every truth is only true sometimes, does that just mean we can never be, really certain about anything at all? This is the heart of the puzzle. And yeah, these common interpretations, they all kind of point to the same pretty bleak conclusion, right? A world of total skepticism where nothing feels solid. But what if this whole way of thinking is just built on a shaky foundation? So, to find that foundation, we really need to get clear on two words that get thrown around and misused all the time in these kinds of talks: objective and subjective. Let's kind of rebuild our understanding of them from scratch, based on what our source material tells us. Okay, first up, subjective truth. And right away, let's just forget the whole idea that this just means it's your opinion. Think of it more like a state of potential. A subjective truth isn't saying certainty is impossible. No, it's just saying we haven't locked it in yet. The possibility is still totally there. And then, on the other side of the coin, you've got objective truth. Now hold on. This doesn't mean some grand universal truth that's true everywhere for all time. Not at all. It just means that clarity has been found, that certainty has been confirmed. But, and this is the key part, for a very specific context, a specific situation. So, do you see what's happening here? The big point is this. Neither subjective nor objective has anything to do with a total lack of certainty. It's not about certainty versus uncertainty at all. It's about the status of that certainty. Is it still potential, or has it been confirmed for a specific situation? The idea that certainty just isn't there, that's not even part of the equation. Okay, and this brings us right back to that keyword, relative. If certainty is always on the table, if it just depends on the context, then what in the world does relative actually mean? This is the question that just flips the whole thing on its head. Think about it. If a scientific fact is certain in a lab, and say a moral truth is certain within a specific community, is truth somehow weaker just because it's not exactly the same in both places? Or is it just, specific? And this chart just lays it out so clearly. You've got two paths here. The common view, right? Skepticism. It says relativity means nothing can be certain, and that just leads to constant doubt. But the deeper view sees relativity as adaptation. It says, hey, certainty just depends on the context, which doesn't lead to doubt at all. It actually leads you on a hunt for the right context. See? Truth isn't gone. It's just precisely located. Our source just nails it with this quote. The way we usually use truth as relative is basically a philosophical mix-up. We're taking this really powerful idea about context, relativity, and we're accidentally swapping it out for a philosophy of doubt, skepticism. So this leads us to a whole new and honestly a much stronger way of looking at it: truth through adaptation. So we're back to our big question. But now we've got a new word in the mix. If truth is strong, if it's certain, but it adapts to fit different situations, where's the weakness? And the answer is, well, there isn't one. In fact, its strength is in its ability to adapt. And that's the core idea right here: adaptive truth. It doesn't just poof, disappear when the context changes. It stays certain, but how it shows up, how it applies, that's what adapts. I mean, think about water. Water is liquid, right? But it adapts to become solid ice in a freezing environment. The truth of what water is doesn't go away, it just adapts. So, when a certain truth doesn't seem to fit a new situation, it's not a failure. It's not proof that truth is a lie, it's just a mismatch. It's like you're trying to apply the truth of ice in the middle of a desert. It's just not the right context. And this, right here, is probably the most powerful takeaway from our source material. That feeling of uncertainty we get when there's a mismatch, that's not a dead end. It's a signpost. It's literally the universe telling you, hey, this truth is totally certain, just not here. Go look for the right context where it fits perfectly. Okay, so what does all this mean for how we see the world, how we talk to each other? Well, it points to something really beautiful, a diversity of realities. So the huge takeaway is this. Relative truth, when you really get it, doesn't get rid of facts. No, it reveals a world that's so much more complex and fascinating. It's a world with this rich tapestry of different contexts, and each one has its own certain corresponding truths. Okay, let's just walk through this one more time. Step 1, a truth seems uncertain. Step 2, you realize, oh, this is just a mismatch between the truth and the situation I'm in. Step 3, that mismatch is actually valuable. It proves that another context exists where that truth is rock solid. And finally, step 4, that feeling of uncertainty becomes your compass, pointing you toward finding that other reality. This quote just ties it all together perfectly. That feeling of doubt isn't a failure of truth itself. It's the start of a discovery. It's a clue that's pointing you toward a different but equally valid frame of reference where certainty is just waiting for you. And so, we'll leave you with this to think about. The next time you're in a disagreement, what if you saw it completely differently? Not as one of us is right and one is wrong, but as two people standing in two totally different contexts, each with their own valid adaptive truth. How does that change the whole conversation? It goes from being a battle to a search for understanding. Something to chew on, right?
You know, in a world that's just overflowing with information, the whole idea of truth can start to feel, well, pretty slippery. What's actually real? What's just someone's opinion? It's so easy to get lost. But what if we had a map? In this explainer, we're going to build one, using our source material to help us navigate this really complex and often confusing territory.
Okay, let's dive right in. The source material kicks things off with a really powerful question. I mean, if we all kind of have a gut feeling for what's certain, why does truth itself feel so fragile sometimes? Where exactly is its weakness?
To even begin to answer that, we have to lay some groundwork. We need to start with a core concept, a distinction we blur all the time in everyday language, but it's absolutely crucial for building our map.
So first up, you've got the idea of something being uncertain. Now, this doesn't mean it isn't true. It just means we can't guarantee it's going to happen again. It leaves the door open to possibility. But then you have impossible, and that's a hard stop. It's a total denial of any possibility. I mean, these two concepts are just worlds apart.
Okay, now get this, because this is where our thinking gets flipped completely on its head. When we say something is not certain, we think we're weakening it, right? But what we're actually doing is confirming that it's in the realm of possibility. I mean, think about it. If it were truly impossible, we wouldn't even be talking about its certainty. So the big takeaway here is, uncertainty is not the opposite of truth.
All right, with that foundation in place, now we can start drawing our map. And as it turns out, most of our confusion about truth really just comes from mixing up two very different territories.
And those two territories are relative truth and subjective truth. Relative truth is all about your context, your point of view, literally where you're standing. Subjective truth, that's different. It's about a process of learning and adapting based on your own experience. So let's dive into that first one.
Okay, so let's explore the first territory on our map, relative truth, and more importantly, the hidden trap it can set for us.
So, what is relative truth exactly? Well, the source defines it as a truth that's based on a specific context or point of view. It's like, imagine two people standing on opposite sides of a huge mountain. One sees a beautiful sunrise, the other sees an amazing sunset. Is either of them wrong? No. Their truths are just different because their positions are different.
But here's the trap. This is where we get into trouble. And it's not because truth is suddenly gone. It's because our position as the observer is flawed. Maybe we're looking at the whole situation from a totally wrong context, or our point of view is just skewed. The weakness isn't in the truth, it's in our perspective.
So, we've just seen the trap of perspective. Now let's head over to the second territory on our map, subjective truth. And yeah, this one comes with its own unique pitfall.
Subjective truth, as our source explains it, is all about adaptation. It's the truth you figure out through trial and error, through experience and learning. And here's the really crucial difference. Unlike relative truth, this process, it can actually be right or wrong. You can learn the right lesson from something, or you can learn the totally wrong one.
And that leads us right to its trap. The truth you arrive at can get all twisted up. But why? Well, maybe an experience gives you a false conclusion. Or maybe your own way of adapting to the world has some hidden bias you don't even see. So, once again, the problem isn't that truth doesn't exist, it's that our process for finding it is broken.
Okay, so we have two types of truth, one of perspective and one of adaptation. And we've seen that both have their own little landmines. This is where the source material brings it all together with a really powerful insight.
And here's the first big reveal. We shouldn't be looking at these concepts as the bad guys. Relativity and subjectivity, they are not the enemy of truth. They're just part of the landscape we have to navigate.
So if they aren't the enemy, then what are they? This is where we have to reframe the whole problem. They are weaknesses, yes, but not in truth itself. They're weaknesses in our own human systems. And this slide just nails it. It perfectly illustrates the two systems we've just been mapping out. The trap of relative truth points to a weakness in our perception, and the trap of subjective truth points to a weakness in our adaptation. You see, the problem isn't out there, it's in here. Which brings us to this final, incredible quote from our source that just perfectly wraps up everything we've talked about. Truth is not weak. What is weak is our perception of it and our ability to adapt to it. Wow. In other words, the map itself doesn't change. It's our ability to read it that's the real challenge.
So, we've laid out the map. We've defined the territories and pointed out the traps, which, as we've seen, aren't really out in the world, but inside ourselves. And that leaves us with a final question we have to ask ourselves. Now that you have the map, what perspective are you even viewing it from? And how good is your ability to adapt when you realize you might be on the wrong path?
You've heard it a million times, right? Oh, well, truth is relative. It's one of those things people say that sounds really deep, but what are you supposed to do with it when you have to make an actual decision? Well, today, we're going to unpack a really cool framework that helps cut right through all that confusion and find some real clarity.
I mean, that's the big question, isn't it? It can feel like you're about to fall down some kind of philosophical rabbit hole. If what's true for you isn't what's true for me, where do we even start? It sounds like it would just lead to total chaos. And look, this isn't just some abstract late-night dorm room debate. This is about the very real choices we have to make every single day. If every option out there has its own truth, how in the world do we pick the one that's actually going to work? How do we ground ourselves in reality? To get to the bottom of this, we're going to look at truth from three totally different but connected perspectives. This framework is pretty much the heart of our entire explainer today, so let's dive in.
Okay, so here's how we think start to organize the chaos. First up, you've got relative truth. This is all about context. Think about it. What's considered polite in one country might be super rude in another. It totally depends on the observer and their viewpoint. Then there's subjective truth. This is more about personal choice and adaptation. You know, like finding the best diet. There's no single right answer for everyone. It's subjective because it depends on your own goals and what you find actually works for your body. And finally, we have objective truth. This is the stuff that's been tested and proven. It's been verified. A classic example is the boiling point of water at sea level. That's a fact.
So those definitions are a great starting point, but let's make this real. Let's put this triad of truth to the test with something big and complicated, like justice. How does this whole thing apply here?
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. When you look at justice through these three lenses, it all starts to click. Relatively speaking, one society might think justice is about restoring harmony to the community, while another focuses on punishing the individual. Two totally different relative approaches. Then, subjectively, a judge within one of those systems has to make a choice, an adaptation, about what sentence they believe fits a specific crime. But, and this is so crucial, how do we know if any of it worked? That's where the objective lens snaps into focus. We can actually measure if justice was served by looking for proof, things like equality before the law or whether a punishment was proportional to the crime.
And this brings us right back to our main dilemma. With all these different relative and subjective ideas about what's just, which one is the realistic path forward? Which one can we actually build on?
Now that we have the framework laid out, let's tackle the biggest pushback you might be thinking of. We're going to hit that common argument head-on and see what the answer is.
This is the classic rebuttal, right? If you accept that truth can be relative or subjective, then doesn't that mean nothing is certain? That we're all just kind of lost in a fog of opinions? It's a really powerful point that can shut down the whole conversation.
But you know what? That viewpoint, that everything is just a big, uncertain mess, it misses the entire point. there's a vital connection here that completely changes the game.
Here it is. This is the core insight. Every single relative and subjective truth isn't just floating out there in space. It contains the potential for objective proof. They aren't the opposites of objective truth. A lot of the time, they are the starting point for finding it.
This gives us a totally new way to think about uncertainty. It doesn't mean there is no truth, it just means an idea is not yet tested. Uncertainty isn't a void, it's a question just waiting for us to run the experiment.
So, that's great in theory, but how do we actually use this insight to make better, more realistic choices? Let's break down the actual framework for doing it.
It's actually a pretty simple process. First, you acknowledge all the different relative and subjective options on the table. You see them all. But you don't stop there. For each one, you ask the key question. What is its not yet tested objective side? How could we find out if this thing really works? And then you make your choice, guided by that potential for proof.
And that's really the whole goal here. This framework isn't supposed to get you stuck, overthinking everything into oblivion. It's meant to empower you, to help you see a world full of confusing options, not as a problem, but as a landscape of possibilities that you can actually test and learn from.
So the next time you hear someone say everything is relative, you'll know that's not the end of the conversation. It's just the beginning. It's an invitation to start testing, to find that objective side, and to discover for yourself what's truly realistic. So what are you going to start testing first?
You know, we've all been there. You're in the middle of a really passionate conversation. You're making your points, and then bam, you hit a brick wall. The whole thing just grinds to a halt with those classic conversation enders. Well, that's just subjective, or, it's all relative. And it feels like a total dead end, right? But what if those words aren't an ending at all? What if they're actually a sign that there's just some unfinished work to do?
Just picture this. You walk out of a movie and you are absolutely buzzing. You're thinking, that was the best film of the year, hands down. But your friend turns to you and they look like they've just wasted 2 hours of their life. To them, it was a complete train wreck. So who's right? How do you even start to talk about that without it ending in a shrug?
And there it is, the stalemate. We all know this feeling. One person sees brilliance, the other sees a total mess, and it just seems impossible to bridge that gap. This is usually where the conversation dies, right? We agree to disagree because, hey, it's just a matter of opinion. But today, we're going to take that whole idea apart.
To solve this puzzle, we have to start with a really foundational idea. We've got to understand the nature of your own personal reality.
Okay, think about it like this. If you touch a hot stove, the pain you feel, well, that's an objective fact for you. Nobody can look at you and say, no, you're not feeling pain. It's your direct experience. And the same thing goes for that movie. If you felt joy or excitement or you were moved, that emotional experience is your own personal, undeniable, objective truth.
So your experience is an objective fact. Got it. But things start to get messy, and that's when the word subjective shows up, the very moment a second person's reality enters the picture. Let's break down how that actually happens.
You can actually see the path laid out here. So, step 1, your reality is objective. Simple enough. Step 2, your friend shows up with their totally different reality. Now, step 3 is the big one. When you just put those two experiences next to each other, without digging into them, without testing them, that's when the situation becomes subjective. It's all murky and unclear. But look at step 4. If you test the comparison, you can actually get back to a new, shared sense of objectivity.
So what in the world does testing even look like? It really just means asking why. It's about exploring the details. So if you find out you both loved the cinematography, great. Your shared objective reality just got a little bigger. But what if you still disagree? The point isn't to prove them wrong. If you love the ending and your friend hated it, the difference between your experiences becomes a brand new objective fact. It's not a fuzzy, subjective mess anymore. It's a clearly understood, well-defined disagreement. And that clarity? That's objective.
All right, so you and your friend have done the work. You've reached a clear, objective understanding of why you both felt differently. You're not in subjective land anymore. But then, a third person walks up to join the conversation.
And this introduces this really interesting idea called collective subjectivity. What it means is, even if you and your friend are totally clear with each other, the second a third, untested opinion gets tossed into the mix, the whole conversation can slide right back into being subjective again.
That one unknown element makes the whole system unclear until it's also been explored and understood.
And this brings us to what is maybe the most powerful, most useful idea in this whole explainer. We are going to completely redefine what subjective and relative actually mean. They are not dead ends, they're road signs.
Just let that one sink in for a minute. This is the whole game changer right here. When someone says it's subjective, they aren't actually ending the conversation. What they're doing, probably without even realizing it, is flagging the fact that the work of understanding isn't done yet. They're handing you an invitation to dig deeper.
So let's decode these signals. From now on, when you hear the word subjective, I want your brain to translate it to this. Okay, some part of this isn't clicking yet. Something hasn't been properly understood between us. And when you hear relative, that's a signal that a specific context or a particular point of view hasn't been factored in yet. It's not an obstacle, it's a clue. Now, this isn't just some abstract theory. This new understanding gives us actual practical tools. It helps us ask way better questions that can break that deadlock and turn a frustrating argument into a really productive dialogue. And this creates a massive shift in our whole approach. So instead of getting stuck on a totally useless question like, okay, but is it true or false that the movie was good, we can ask a new, much more powerful question. Which part of our experiences hasn't been properly understood between us yet? See how that just opens the door to a real conversation? And it's the exact same thing for the word relative. We can just drop that philosophical dead end of, well, is there any real truth here? And instead, we can ask a super practical, targeted question. Okay, which specific context or point of view are we missing? Maybe you saw the movie as a comedy, and your friend saw it as a serious drama. That's the context that needs to be brought into the light. And at the end of the day, this is the whole point. We have to change the goal entirely. The goal is not to win. We're not opponents in a debate anymore. We become collaborators in a project. And that project is to finish the work of creating a clear, shared understanding, even if that understanding is simply that we have a fundamental, well-defined difference in how we experience something.
So as we wrap this up, I'll leave you with this thought to chew on. Think about the last time a conversation you were in just fizzled out with, "It's just subjective." Now that you have these new questions in your back pocket, which of those unfinished conversations could you maybe go back to and this time actually finish?
All right, let's talk about 3 words that can absolutely derail any conversation about what's real: relative, subjective, and objective. We're going to untangle them right now. Let's get into it.
You've heard this a million times, right? Truth is relative. It's like this conversation stopper, this trap that just throws everything into doubt. The implication is, well, if everything's relative, then nothing is certain. But hold on a second, is that what relative really means?
Okay, to get out of that trap, we've got to fix our definitions first. We need to get on the same page with these 3 key terms, because when you get them right, they don't cause confusion. Actually, they become a map for figuring things out.
So let's start with objective truth. This is your anchor. It's the solid ground. Think of it as pure evidence. Something that's been confirmed, it's been tested and proven true, even if it's just in one specific situation. It's a fact.
All right, next up is subjective truth, and this is so important. Subjective does not mean false. It just means something is, well, it's incomplete. It's a work in progress. It's a state of uncertainty because not everyone involved has confirmed it or adapted to it yet.
And that brings us to the big one, relative truth. This is probably the most misunderstood of them all. Relative doesn't mean truth doesn't exist. It just means a truth belongs to a specific place, a specific context or viewpoint. You could say that all relative truths are true. They're just in different locations on the map.
So check this out. These words aren't weaknesses. They're not flaws in the idea of truth. They're actually our tools for finding it. Relative is the map that shows us all the different territories. Subjective is the compass we use while we're still exploring. And objective, that's the proof. That's the treasure we find at the destination.
And this right here, this is the core of it. Truth isn't weak. We are the variables in the equation. Our perception, that's the relative part. It depends on where we're standing. And our process of understanding and adapting, well, that's the subjective part of the journey.
Okay, so we've got our tools: a map, a compass, and proof. Now, how do we actually use them? How do we take these ideas and build a real practical framework for finding some certainty? Let's break it down.
Here's a really smart step-by-step way to walk through uncertainty. First, always prioritize what is objectively proven. Start with the facts. Second, anything that's not proven, treat it like a hypothesis that needs testing. Third, just discard the impossible. Don't waste time on it. And finally, and this is key, allow yourself the space to actually test the uncertain things. It's a fantastic way to move forward even when you don't have all the answers.
And this comparison really helps build out that framework. Just because something is still subjective, still a work in progress, that doesn't erase what's already objective. The foundation is still the foundation. An ongoing process doesn't invalidate a concluded test. It just means the journey isn't over yet.
And just think about this. All it takes is one. If something has been proven true even one single time in a specific context, that's all the proof you need that certainty is possible. The existence of even one objective truth, however small, proves that there is solid ground out there to be found.
All right, so we've got the concept. Now let's turn it into wisdom. How do we apply this framework to actually change how we talk, how we think about really complex stuff? Because this is where it gets really, really useful. This table is amazing because it's a practical guide. Look, if someone says, this is still subjective, our first instinct is to argue. Is it true or false? But that's the wrong question. A way better question is, okay, what part hasn't been adapted yet? Same for relative. Instead of, is there any truth here, ask, which context are we misreading? All of a sudden, subjective and relative aren't dead ends anymore. They're signposts pointing to where the work needs to be done.
Here's another great way to remember this, to really lock it in. Relative is the position. Subjective is the process. And objective is the proof. Position, process, proof. Simple as that.
And let's be real for a second. There's a cynical take on this, right? Sometimes people throw around the word relative to sound deep and wise, when really what's happening is they just don't have the honesty to admit they haven't found the answer yet. Truth isn't lost. What's lost is the willingness to keep looking.
But let's bring it back to the practical, useful version. It all boils down to this. Use what's proven, test what's not, discard what's impossible. That's it. That is how wise people walk through uncertainty. It's not magic, it's a method.
Okay, so this whole framework, it's like a compass for finding truth. Let's wrap up by looking at the key takeaways you can start using right away.
So here are the big things to remember. First, when you face a dilemma, it doesn't mean there's no truth. It just means you have two truths that need to be prioritized. Second, uncertainty isn't a dead end. It's just a sign that your journey toward getting it right is still in progress. Third, the fact that something exists and has consequences, that itself is a source of certainty. And finally, please remember this. Doubting everything isn't a sign of maturity. It's usually a sign you haven't really started searching seriously.
So let's not hide behind words like relative and subjective as an excuse, as if truth just doesn't exist. It does. Truth is out there, and it's basically waiting for anyone who's honest enough to actually seek it out.
So I'll leave you with this to think about. What truth in your own life are you trying to figure out right now? Maybe something that feels a little shaky or uncertain. And maybe, just maybe, it's not because truth is missing, but because you just haven't found the right context for it yet. Something to consider.
You hear it everywhere, right? Your truth, my truth. And honestly, in today's world, it's easy to feel like the whole idea of a single objective reality is just falling apart. It feels confusing, messy, almost like truth is optional now. But what if it's not? What if there's a hidden structure to it all, an architecture we just need to learn how to see? Let's get into it.
All right, first things first. We have to go straight at the biggest idea that seems to challenge truth itself. This popular belief that absolutely everything is relative.
I mean, we hear it all the time, don't we? Well, that's just your truth. And it sounds so open-minded. But it forces us to ask a really fundamental question. With billions of different perspectives out there, is there anything left that is simply, unshakably true for everyone? The framework we're digging into today gives a really clear, really confident answer to that question. And that answer is yes, absolutely. Truth isn't some illusion. It's a real destination.
And this quote right here, it completely flips the script on the whole problem. It's suggesting that the issue isn't that truth is flimsy or doesn't exist. No, the real variable, the real uncertainty, is us. It's about how honest we're being, the context we're in, and whether we're mature enough to actually find it.
So, to really get a grip on this journey, we have to break down the idea of truth itself. Turns out, it's not just one thing. This framework describes 3 different but totally interconnected faces of truth. Okay, this table is awesome for laying it all out.
First, you have objective truth. It's based on proof, or bukti. This is the unchanging destination we're all trying to get to. Then there's subjective truth, which is all about our personal process, or process. Think of this as our internal compass. And finally, there's relative truth. This is based on our position, or posishi. It's like the map of the world as we see it from where we're standing. See? Each one has a critical job to do.
And this is the key takeaway. Just because truth can be relative doesn't mean objective truth is a myth. It just means our personal map doesn't show the whole territory yet. Our subjective feelings, our compass, are pointing us in a direction, but they aren't the destination itself. This isn't just philosophy, you know? This is a super practical tool for navigating everything from a confusing news cycle to an argument online. Relativity and subjectivity aren't the enemies of truth. They're literally part of the journey to it.
Okay, so this all sounds really good in theory, but we all know the journey can get, well, really, really difficult. What happens when we hit a genuine dilemma?
Now this is the ultimate test, right? This isn't about an opinion versus a fact. We're talking about a situation where you have two proven, verifiable, objective truths, and they're in direct conflict. They're forcing you to make a choice. Have you ever been there? I bet you have.
Here's a perfect real-world example we've all lived through. It is an objective truth that a strong economy is crucial for people's lives and well-being. It is also an objective truth that protecting public health is essential. But in a crisis, the very actions you take to protect one can directly harm the other. Both are true. Both are incredibly important. So, what do you do?
And this leads us to such a beautiful reframing of what a dilemma actually is. It doesn't mean that truth has failed us. A dilemma is simply a situation where two truths are both demanding our attention at the same time. They're both asking for their turn. The goal isn't to pretend one of them isn't true. The goal is to apply wisdom to figure out the right priority for that specific moment.
So if wisdom is the answer, how do we actually, do it? How do we navigate these impossible feeling situations without just throwing our hands in the air? Well, thankfully, there's a really practical framework for that too.
This is basically the playbook for wisdom. You start with what is proven, what has evidence. That's your bedrock. Anything you're not sure about, it's not a truth yet, it's a hypothesis. You need to treat it like a scientist would, as something you need to test. Then you discard the stuff that is clearly impossible. Get it out of the way so it doesn't muddy the waters. And finally, and this is so important, you give space to test the uncertain. You stay open.
I just love this quote because it's so incredibly actionable. It takes this big, scary search for truth and turns it from some passive philosophical debate into an active, strategic process. It's a real guide for how to keep moving forward, even when you don't have all the answers.
All right, so let's bring it all home. We can tie all these ideas together with a really powerful metaphor that makes it all click.
Think of it this way. Your relative truth? That's the map you're holding right now. It shows you the world from your unique vantage point, based on what you currently know. It's vital for getting started, but it probably doesn't show the whole territory.
Next, your subjective truth. That is your internal compass. It's your gut feeling, your intuition, your values. It gives you a sense of direction, helping you decide which path on that map you want to take.
And objective truth? That is the proof you find along your journey. It's the solid ground beneath your feet, the real, verifiable landmarks that confirm you are, in fact, on the right path.
And that brings us to the most crucial piece of all. Your map, your compass, the proof you find along the way, they are all in service of getting you to a real place. And that place is truth. It always exists. It's always there, waiting, even if we don't quite know the way to get there yet.
So I'll just leave you with this one last question to chew on. The next time we say everything is relative, are we really trying to be open-minded and embrace different perspectives? Or are we just giving ourselves an easy way out, an excuse to stop doing the hard but incredibly rewarding work of actually seeking what's real? Something to think about.
You ever been in one of those debates where someone just goes, well, that's just subjective, and the conversation just stops? Today, we're going to tear that idea apart and look at a really powerful new way to understand the line between subjective and objective reality. So let's get into it. All right, first up, let's look at the classic showdown. We're all taught to think about this in a very particular way, right? Like there's this huge, clear wall between what we feel and what we know for sure. And this is that classic view. You've got two columns. In one corner, you have subjective stuff, Personal feelings, opinions, all that squishy human emotion. And in the other corner, you have the objective, hard, cold, empirical facts and pure rationality. Seems pretty clean, right? One is personal, the other is universal.
But come on, is anything ever really that simple? What if putting these ideas in two separate boxes is actually holding us back? What if the line between them isn't a wall, but more like a journey?
And this brings us to the core idea of this whole thing. Let's try to reframe this entire concept, not as two things fighting each other, but as two different stages of the very same process. Okay, check out this new definition. Subjective isn't the opposite of a fact. It is a fact. It's just a fact that hasn't been put through the ringer yet. It hasn't been widely measured or verified by a bunch of other people. So it's not unreal, it's just untested. Now let that sink in for a second. When you experience something, whether it's joy or pain or some sudden realization, that experience is 100% real and factual for you. It objectively happened to you. The subjective part just means its dimensions haven't been confirmed by others. It's basically an objective event with an audience of one. So this process right here shows that journey from subjective to objective. It all starts with a personal experience, a subjective fact. Then comes the verification process. You share it, people test it, they measure it, and if it holds up, it graduates to becoming a widely accepted, objective fact. See? It's a spectrum, not a light switch. So, what does all this actually mean for us in the real world? Well, thinking this way has some amazing upsides, but it also comes with a really, really serious warning label that we have to pay attention to. Let's start with the good stuff, the benefits. When you start seeing subjectivity as this untested state, it can totally change your outlook. You might become way more open to new ideas because you see them as potential facts just waiting to be explored. It really fosters curiosity and makes you appreciate that other people have different perspectives for a reason. But, and this is a huge but, there is a massive risk here. We cannot use this framework to dismiss someone else's reality. Just because another person's pain is subjective to us or untested by our own experience does not make it any less real or severe for them. That is the danger zone, using this idea to invalidate suffering that we just don't personally understand. So this brings us to the really practical part. Okay, the theory is cool, but how do we decide when to lean into subjectivity and when do we absolutely have to push for objective verification? We should embrace subjectivity when we're dealing with personal feelings or when the goal is just to explore and understand different viewpoints. But when a decision is going to impact a lot of people, when fairness is critical, or when the risk of getting it wrong is super high, that's when we have to push for objective, verified standards. It's all about choosing the right tool for the job. So I'll leave you with this question. Armed with this new perspective, what belief or assumption of yours, something you've maybe written off as just subjective or accepted as just a fact, are you now going to look at a little differently? What reality is now open for a new round of testing?